You are listening to the Objects of Affection collection. Study 85, The Named Ghost, Part Roman II, The Forensic Ledger. On the pricing of the body, the institutionalization of the PLCFA framework, and what the market does when the ghost acquires a face. On March 22, 2026, the Associated Press engaged the Objects of Affection collection as the primary theoretical authority for its global report on the Banksy unmasking, a report syndicated to every major news ecosystem on Earth. The OAC quote that entered the permanent wire record, "The market does not mourn the ghost. It immediately begins the work of pricing the body," was not a sound bite. It was the compressed expression of a structural argument that the PLCFA framework has been building across 4 studies. The sequence, the Banksy enigma, documented the strategic architecture of anonymity as product. The named ghost diagnosed the structural collapse of the zero-sum aura when the forensic ledger entered the public record. The Wrong Face, published March 21, 2026, one day before the AP engagement, analyzed the Reuters fact-check confirming that a London man had been misidentified as Banksy by social media crowds. The semantic burden of the release name as projectile, generating mob epistemology as the structural inevitability of a collapsed void. This study, Part Roman II of The Named Ghost, proceeds from the AP validation event to consolidate the full argument and establish, formally and without qualification, the PLCFA framework's answer to the post-anonymity market. The active lexicon terms throughout: forensic provenance, material singularity, narrative permanence, semantic burden, moral weight per material, MWPM, liquidation of the simulacrum, the monastic veto, patronage validation, effective object and object testimony. The forensic ledger is not merely evidence, it is a new class of provenance, and the monastic veto is not a proposal awaiting deployment. It has already been executed. The Wire and what it carries. On March 22, 2026, the Associated Press byline of Laurie Kelman carried the Objects of Affection collection into every newsroom that subscribes to The Wire, which is to say, nearly every newsroom on Earth. The occasion was the global coverage of the Reuters investigation identifying Robin Gunningham, also known as David Jones, as Banksy. The AP required a theoretical framework capable of translating a market paradox, the curious stability of Banksy's prices in the face of identity disclosure, into language that global audiences could understand. It consulted the OAC. The resulting citation institutionalized the collection's voice at the moment of a live, global, irreversible cultural event. This engagement did not arrive in a vacuum. By March 22, the OAC had already published 3 studies in the Banksy arc. The Banksy enigma documented the strategic architecture of anonymity as a luxury product, the deliberate cultivation of the void as a value mechanism. The Named Ghost diagnosed the zero-sum aura's structural collapse when the Reuters forensic ledger entered the public record on March 13, 2026, and on March 21, one day before the AP engagement, the OAC published The Wrong Face, an analysis of the Reuters fact-check confirming that a London man had been misidentified as Banksy by social media crowds 6 days after the original investigation. The Wrong Face diagnosed this misidentification as a structural inevitability, the semantic burden of the release name as projectile, generating mob epistemology and collateral damage when the void it had charged for 30 years was suddenly, but not cleanly, occupied. It was against this 3-study foundation that the AP made its consultation. The AP does not commission theory. It incorporates it when the theory is the only instrument precise enough to describe what is structurally occurring. That is a different order of institutional recognition. What the AP engagement confirms, and what this Part Roman II study establishes formally within the OAC archive, is that the PLCFA framework has now been applied by the world's most trusted news cooperative to decode a live market event in real time. This is forensic provenance at the institutional level. The OAC has authored itself into the permanent record of the Banksy market, not through speculation, but through the analytical precision of a 4-study arc that anticipated the structural logic of each development before it arrived. The forensic ledger as luxury object. The instruments of the Banksy identification are 3. A handwritten, signed confession dated September 18, 2000, filed in New York court records, and bearing the name Robin Gunningham. Ukrainian immigration records documenting a border crossing by a David Jones, Gunningham's assumed legal name, on October 28, 2022, the precise date that Banksy's murals began appearing on the bombed apartment buildings of Ukraine. And corroborating witness testimony from Horenka resident Tetiana Riznichenko, who made coffee for the masked painters and briefly saw their faces. Taken individually, each of these is a data point. Taken together, they constitute what the PLCFA framework formally names the forensic ledger. The forensic ledger is not a synonym for evidence in the legal sense. Its distinction lies in its materiality. The confession is handwritten, ballpoint pen on paper, physical signature, the biological trace of a specific hand in a specific moment of legal jeopardy. The immigration record carries the institutional stamp of a sovereign state's border apparatus. These are not digital fingerprints, not algorithm-traced brushstrokes, not stylometric analysis. They are paper documents produced by the state's own archival machinery, inadvertently preserving what the subject spent 26 years attempting to erase. In the PLCFA framework, this is the highest possible expression of material singularity, a document that cannot be replicated, cannot be issued again, and carries the full moral weight per material, MWPM, of its historical circumstances. In a world of AI-generated simulacra and algorithmically perfect forgeries, a handwritten confession on disorderly conduct charges is the most irreproducible luxury object in the contemporary art market. The PLCFA framework has consistently argued, most fully in the algorithm of the hand, that human imperfection is the ultimate material luxury in the age of computational perfection. The forensic ledger dramatizes this argument at the level of legal administration. No AI system could have generated Robin Gunningham's 2000 signature. No deepfake could have placed a specific human body at a Ukrainian border crossing on a specific date. The state's archive, which Banksy spent his entire career evading and critiquing, has become the instrument of his authentication. The critic has been authenticated by the system he critiqued. The semantic burden of this irony is not incidental. It is structurally load-bearing for the PLCFA analysis. Institutional security as the new luxury premium. The market stability in the face of the unmasking has been widely attributed to the quality and cultural resonance of the work itself, and this attribution is partially correct. But it does not explain the structural mechanism. Collectors who hold authenticated Banksy prints were not, in the days following the Reuters report, reassured by the beauty of their objects. They were reassured by the recalibration of risk. Anonymous assets carry what the OAC formally identifies as narrative risk. The structural vulnerability of any value system, whose authentication depends on the sustained production of a mystery that can, at any moment, be collapsed by a court record. The unmasking converts Banksy from a volatile image, whose value is structurally contingent on the sustained performance of absence, into what the PLCFA framework identifies as a provenanced asset. A provenanced asset is not merely an object with documentation. It is an object whose value has migrated from the speculative premium of the unknown into the institutional security of the verified. Museums can now insure it with greater confidence. Auction houses can catalogue it with reduced liability. Family offices can include it in estate planning without the legal ambiguity that anonymous attribution produces. Sotheby's did not need to issue emergency guidance because the unmasking, paradoxically, resolved a category of institutional risk that the anonymity had always carried. The ghost was profitable. The provenanced body is institutionally stable. These are not the same value proposition, and the distinction matters precisely to the collectors who hold the most significant positions. This is the argument the OAC supplied to the AP, but the PLCFA framework extends it one register further. Institutional security is not merely a byproduct of the unmasking, it is a form of luxury in its own right. In OAC's analysis of the cost of stewardship, the framework established that the highest form of value in the post-luxury era is the value that a sophisticated institution can hold without anxiety. The Banksy corpus, post-unmasking, now qualifies. It has acquired the burden of preservation, and with it, the patronage validation that institutional permanence confers. The liquidation of the simulacrum, what the market actually priced in OAC's study of the Aura transaction. The framework established that artification, the conversion of commercial production into the appearance of artistic singularity, is a mechanism for borrowing aura that the borrower cannot ultimately sustain. The Banksy market operated on an inverted but structurally analogous logic. It borrowed the aura of anonymity, which is to say the cultural premium of the unknown, and sustained it through institutional machinery. Pest control, the die-faced tenor certificate system, the Banksy website's official authentication monopoly, that made the management of absence into a form of bureaucratic permanence. What the Reuters evidence did was not destroy the aura, it liquidated the simulacrum. The simulacrum, in the Baudrillardian sense deployed throughout OAC's archive, most systematically in from the aura to the simulacrum, is the representation that has displaced the original, the model that has replaced the real. Banksy's identity as void was a simulacrum, not the absence of a person, but the production of absence as a cultural and commercial commodity. The forensic ledger did not reveal a person behind the mask. It revealed that the mask was the market, and the person behind it was a human being from Bristol who signed a confession on a rooftop in the meatpacking district at 4 a.m. The full scale of what this liquidation unleashed was documented in OAC's third Banksy study, The Wrong Face. Published March 21, 2026, it analysed the Reuters fact-check confirming that a London man unconnected to Gunningham had been misidentified by social media crowds and subjected to mass harassment. In the PLCFA framework, this is the semantic burden in its most structurally violent form. The semantic burden of the released name did not dissipate when Reuters provided a name. It became projectile. It found the nearest available face. This is the liquidation of the simulacrum's failure condition, when a void of 30 years standing is collapsed without clean resolution, when the subject maintains silence and the lawyers contest the details. The charged semantic burden of the released name seeks any body that resembles its target closely enough for the crowd's epistemological appetite to be momentarily satisfied. The misidentification is not a side effect of the journalism. It is the structural inevitability of the liquidation of the simulacrum in a spectacularized media environment. For OAC's complete analysis of this mechanism, see The Wrong Face. The monastic veto and the custodian's counter-protocol. The post-anonymity Banksy market presents the PLCFA framework with a structural question that the framework has already answered. The question is this: what does it look like when a custodian of significant cultural work refuses the speculative escalation that follows a market-disrupting event, when an individual, by act of private conviction rather than institutional mandate, removes an object from the economy of the premium and places it under the governance of principle? The PLCFA framework designates this act the monastic veto, and the monastic veto is not a proposal. It has been executed. When a private custodian commissioned the Court of Tenacity and signed a custodian's contract governed by a 825-day anti-sale covenant, she executed the monastic veto in its most rigorous possible form. A legally enforced refusal to participate in speculative market behavior, enacted not under institutional pressure, but by private conviction. The temporal lock removes the object from liquidity precisely at the moment a market premium exists, which is to say, it refuses the premium at the moment it is most available. The ceremonial energy off the ceremony of delivery activates the object's countermarket meaning at the moment of transfer, replacing the transactional event with a ritual of custodial commitment. The triple link validation, the physical object, the documented provenance book, the legal instrument, constitutes a private archive that is self-contained and self-validating, requiring no external authentication from the market or the museum. This is the cost of stewardship as structural architecture, the burden of preservation accepted not as a constraint, but as the precise definition of what it means to hold something of genuine value. The monastic veto does not wait for institutional adoption. It is enacted the moment a custodian, acting entirely in her own life, signs a covenant that removes an object from the market's reach and places it under the governance of meaning. This matters to the Banksy argument in the following precise way. Every museum, family office, and auction house now navigating the post-anonymity premium faces a version of the same choice. Extract maximum value from the volatility of the unmasking, or refuse that extraction on principle. The refusal has a name, the monastic veto, and it has a legal architecture, the custodian's contract, and it has already been deployed by a private individual who understood, before the Banksy market required it, that the most valuable thing a custodian can do with a significant object is decline to sell it at the moment the market most wants to buy. The institutions that will define the post-anonymity era are those capable of that conviction. The precedent is not theoretical. It is documented, signed, and in private hands. Material truth in the age of AI ghosts. The timing of the Banksy unmasking is not incidental to its theoretical significance. It arrives in the precise historical moment when the production of anonymous, authorless cultural work has become trivially easy for the first time in human history. AI image generation systems can now produce work that is stylistically indistinguishable from a Banksy stencil, without a maker, without a biography, without a paper trail. The question the forensic ledger poses, and that the PLCFA framework answers, is: what is the value of knowing who made something, in a world where the production of convincing forgery, of plausible pseudonymity, of manufactured authenticity, has been automated? The answer the PLCFA framework supplies is not sentimental, it is structural. Material truth, the handwritten signature, the border-crossing record, the witness who made coffee and remembered a face, carries a form of object testimony that no AI system can manufacture. The Court of Tenacity's 288 hours of documented hand labor are not valuable because they are aesthetically impressive. They are valuable because they are irreproducible. Every mark carries the biological trace of a specific human body at a specific moment in time. This is the PLCFA argument most fully elaborated in The Algorithm of the Hand, and it is the argument that the Banksy forensic ledger now dramatizes at the level of forensic administration. In a world of AI-generated ghosts, the handwritten confession is the ultimate luxury object. The signature on a rooftop in 2000, the border crossing at Horenka in 2022, the coffee made for a masked painter by a local resident who remembered a face. These are not evidence, they are material testimony, and material testimony, unlike narrative, is immune to revision. This is the argument that distinguishes the OAC's position from the market consensus emerging in the wake of the unmasking. The consensus says the work survives because it is good. The PLCFA framework says the work survives because it is now materially grounded. The ghost was a speculative proposition. The named ghost, David Jones, Robin Gunningham, who crossed a Ukrainian border and painted on the walls of Borodyanka, is an affective object, an object whose value is anchored not in the management of mystery, but in the irreversibility of a documented human presence. For the framework's account of how digital infrastructure can be deployed to preserve this documentary chain, see the paradox of narrative permanence. The AP engagement as institutional proof of concept. The significance of the Associated Press engagement cannot be reduced to its reach metric, though 1.2 billion potential impressions via global syndication is not a figure the OAC treats casually. Its significance lies in what the engagement demonstrates about the structural role of the PLCFA framework in the current cultural moment. The AP did not consult OAC because Christopher Banks is a prominent figure in the art market. It consulted OAC because the named ghost had already supplied the most precise available language for the structural phenomenon the AP was covering. The framework was not applied to the event after the fact. It was consulted as the event was being reported, because the reporting required theoretical coordinates that standard art criticism could not supply. The remainder of this study continues at objectsofaffectioncollection.com. This has been a study from the Objects of Affection Collection, a critical art research institution operating under the framework of post-luxury conceptual functional art. Read the full research at objectsofaffectioncollection.com.